How to overcome betrayal in your own family. My boss, Jim Wright, told me to take a quick tour of the hotel so I could see how extensive the electrical upgrades needed to be. In the meantime, he was to meet with the owners of the hotel at their office. I strolled around the pool smartly, without letting anyone know that I was trying my best to capture all the cleavage I could. It was then that I saw a red-haired fox in her mid-40s chatting with a man obviously a few years younger than her. They pulled their loungers toward each other, and the man put his hand on her left knee. As he did so, his elbow made constant contact with the lady's generously shaped left breast. I immediately hurried away from the pool, relaxing only when I was out of sight of the poolside vacationers. I pondered my options for behavior for a full 20 seconds. Instinctively, I knew what I should do, but I briefly considered the consequences, and saw only one decent course of action. Taking out my cell phone, I sent a quick text message to my boss, and carefully snuck back to the pool, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. I stood in the shade of the upper balcony with my phone's camera display on. Slowly counting to 25, I began filming the couple I had noticed earlier. The woman was now lying in a chaise lounge with her top unbuttoned, and the man was slowly applying sunscreen to her back, paying special attention to the impressive area of her breasts that protruded from under her torso and was spectacularly exposed. I had only been shooting the video for a few seconds when an obviously enraged man ran up to the couple. He grabbed a handful of the lotion master's hair and yanked his head back mercilessly. In doing so, the man's chin and throat were exposed. I could easily hear the thump as the angry man's fist met Romeo's throat. This was immediately followed by a second punch, this time to the man's chin. The man who had been wooing the sensual red-haired woman seconds ago was now lying on the side of the pool, making horrible gagging noises, and blood was oozing from his mouth onto the pool deck. It all happened so fast that the woman barely had time to look back to see a very angry man rubbing his fist as he stood over her. It lasted a few seconds before he grabbed her by her red curls. "Jim!" was all she managed to blurt out before he lifted her to her feet by the hair on her head. I was still recording, so I captured her relaxed, but rather firm tits bouncing as the man turned her around to face him. "You fucking idiot," was all he could squeeze out as he looked at his wife's panic-stricken face and then down at her loose breasts. I feared for a moment that he was going to hit her, but thankfully he contained his anger and just pushed her back into the pool. Then threw a few chairs and plastic tables across the deck before he saw me standing off to the side. He visibly slouched, then clumsily moved in my direction. "Mike, take me to the fucking truck before I end up in jail," was all he could squeeze out as tears streamed down his cheeks. I took Jim to the parking lot to the company truck. By this time, he had turned into a real zombie, and as I drove down the freeway, he showed no emotion and stared straight ahead. The 2-hour drive home was eerily silent, save for the occasional guttural sounds that escaped Jim's throat. I parked in the driveway and walked him home. Jim sat at the kitchen table while I pulled 2 beers out of the refrigerator. I put one in front of him and opened the other for myself. Then I sank into the chair across from him. His unwavering gaze made me more than a little uncomfortable. I stared into his eyes for a few seconds before asking, "Did we get the contract?" Jim blinked at my question before suddenly bursting into a burst of laughter. "You're a dumb dude," was all he muttered as he opened his beer and took a big gulp. My question was probably stupid, but it brought Jim out of his trance. "That lying fool told me she was going to spend a few days with her mother at her parents' cabin on the lake. She left yesterday morning. She's probably been sleeping with that damned Harris since yesterday. God damn it, I called her mom's cabin this morning and asked to speak to Kelly. Her mom told me she was in the shower, but she would have her call in a few minutes. Kelly called about 10 minutes later. If she was in her mother's bathroom at the lake at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's no way in hell she could have made it to Timberbrook by the time you found her with that bastard, identical Harris." "And that indicates that her mother had her back," I reasoned. "It indicates that her mother knew what the hell Kelly was doing and was covering for her," Jim echoed my words. "Heck, she's been visiting her mother at the cottage every summer since we got married. Now I have to wonder how long this crap has been going on and whether one egger was the first or just one of many." Jim had an interesting point of view, and I considered it from every possible angle as I drove home. It seemed possible and even likely that Jim's wife had been aided and abetted in the affair by her own mother. Could it have been an inherited trait, or just some weakness that had been nurtured over generations? As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my mother-in-law's car. I didn't feel like listening to her nonsense, so I parked and went to the back door, knowing my wife Tracy would be sitting at the kitchen table drinking wine with her mother. As usual, I was right. The only thing I didn't expect was the volume of conversation. Well, to be honest, both the intensity and content of the conversation was a bit of a shock. "Mom!" Tracy practically yelled at her mother. "You know how much Daddy hates one-eyed. What the hell were you thinking?" I couldn't help but feel somewhat proud of Tracy's outrage at her mother's actions. She and I had vowed to remain faithful throughout our married life. Tracy and I certainly agreed on that point. "Please don't refer to Bentley as one-eyed. It was an accident. Besides, he's still capable of performing quite well," Kelly insisted. "It wasn't an accident," Tracy replied. "You were out in broad daylight with another man instead of Daddy, and only 2 hours away from home. I warned you about keeping your guard up, but you did it anyway." "I thought we were far enough away from home to be safe. I don't know why your father was there or how he found us by the pool. He never goes to hotels, much less their pools. Do you think he's cheating on me?" "No, I don't know," Tracy replied. "Dad adores you. He would never cheat. And I'm sure he had no idea you were tooting his horn. That's why his reaction was so violent. He must have been shocked to see one eye rubbing lotion on your big breasts." "Bentley only rubbed lotion on the sides of my breasts," Kelly stated. "He was a real gentleman." "I'm sure he was. His father punched him in the throat with his fist and then broke his jaw for no good reason. How are you going to handle this, Mom? Dad seems really pissed off." "I'd like to stay with you for a few days until your father calms down, if you don't mind. You know how much Jim adores me. He'll get over this little mistake." "Maybe until he finds out about your other mistakes," Tracy suggested. "You know that wouldn't end well." Kelly had made other mistakes, as Tracy called them. Did my wife know about them? She didn't seem very surprised that her mom was with one egg. This information was disturbing. Not wanting them to know I was in the house and eavesdropping on their conversation, I quietly went out the back door and walked around the front of the house. The mother and daughter fell silent as soon as the door opened. I nodded to the now silent duo, walked over to the refrigerator and pulled out a beer. It occurred to me that they had no idea how much I knew about the day's events and were waiting for me to show my knowledge in some way. But I turned around and went upstairs to take a shower. They had to be curious about how much I knew, how I would react, what I would say, and who I would tell. However, I decided to leave them guessing. The whole situation was a hell of a mess, and Tracy's role in it was disturbing to say the least. It struck me that Tracy obviously knew her mom was promiscuous, but had never mentioned it to her dad or me. Keeping a secret like that was the same as lying, as far as I could tell. I had just finished getting changed when Tracy walked into the bedroom. "Mom and Dad had a little fight today. Mom wants to stay with us for a few days until they settle their differences. I told her I'm okay with it. I hope you don't mind." "What kind of husband would I be if I objected to my wife's mother staying for a few days?" I asked rhetorically. "Your parents deserve special consideration. Look how kind your father has been to me. He's a really great guy." Tracy seemed to be studying my face, looking for any hint of my feelings. When I mentioned her father, she flinched slightly, but maybe it was my imagination. "That's one of the reasons I love you so much, Mike. You always treat me and my family like we're special," Tracy replied. "I've been working with your father for 5 years now. I knew him before I met you, and he is special. He gave me my first real job. He's a good boss, a great father-in-law, and the best father a girl could ever have." For some reason, my praise of her father didn't seem to please Tracy as much as it should have. I had never noticed it before. But now it seemed to me that Tracy was feeling some guilt over her mother's extramarital antics. Had I just never noticed anything before? Kelly spent half of dinner asking me questions about work. She wanted to know what projects we had going on, what we were bidding on, and where I was working that day. It was obvious she was trying to find out how much I knew and how Jim ended up at the same hotel where she had ordered the one-egg special the night before. I avoided any mention of Jim being asked to do an upgrade job at the Prodigal Hotel or my role in the swim pool denouement. I decided that my wife and her mother were not the only people who might have secrets. After dinner, I announced that I was going to mow the lawn. As my suspicions dominated my thoughts, I secretly left my phone in record mode behind a banana on the kitchen table, away from the dishwasher. It was getting dark by the time I finished putting the mower away. Both women were watching Survivor on the TV in the living room. I put my phone in my pocket and said goodnight to them before heading upstairs to the master bedroom. Then I listened to the recorded conversation my wife had with her mother after I left the house. To put it mildly, it opened my eyes. The two women were plotting how to get Jim to forgive her. They came up with a few ideas, but it basically boiled down to Kelly sleeping with Jim stupidly for as long as it took for him to fully forgive and trust his wayward wife. My wife obligingly suggested that Kelly increase the amount of pleasuring she would do to Jim and let him fondle her from time to time. Kelly was not thrilled with this option. "That was a couple years ago, and I hope to look as good as Mom when I'm her age," Kelly stated. "It really turns Bentley on when he talks about how he slept with a mother-daughter combination. He even wanted me to ask if he could do a hat trick with you. Not many men have 3 generations of family." "Are you kidding me? He's almost as old as Daddy, and he only has 1 nut," Tracy remarked. "I can't even imagine being with him. By the way, how big is his friend?" "Let's just say you won't be disappointed," Kelly replied, as if she were recommending a good hairdresser. "Just make sure I don't rock Bentley's little grandson on my lap." "I've never cheated on Mike, and I certainly wouldn't start with 1 nut," Tracy declared. "I want Mike to be the father of all our children. That's the only thing I'm going to take care of. I love the guy." "I love your father, too. That's why this whole thing is so complicated. I don't want a divorce," Kelly insisted. "It's just that he works so many hours and comes home really tired. We're lucky to have sex a couple times a week. That's why I needed the Bentley." "Really, Mom? What about George Marsh and Jeff Stevens and God knows who else?" "I don't like the way this conversation is going. Let's go watch Survivor. I think that fat-ass Italian girl is going to get voted off this week," Kelly stated in an obvious attempt to change the subject. I saved the conversation to a flash drive and lay down, knowing I would get very little sleep that night. I had a lot to think about. Work the next day was excruciating. Jim was a mess as he handed out work assignments to start the day. There were 5 of us working at Wright Electric, and we exchanged glances as Jim, stammering, read his instructions. As usual, Jim and I were working together on our current project, so he climbed into the passenger seat of the company truck. We were wiring a house under construction, so we could talk freely without fear of anyone overhearing us. Once Jim started telling me about his situation, he continued talking all morning. I assume it was cathartic for him, but it further confused my mental state. I had a hard time reconciling what I had heard from my wife and her mother with the future I envisioned. Would Tracy eventually become a traveling wife like her mother and apparently her grandmother? Would I have enough influence in her life to keep her faithful? Was it worth the risk of a failed marriage or living the life of a cuckold? "Kelly called me this morning," Jim began. "She told me she wanted to apologize for possibly giving me the impression that she was cheating on me with Bentley. She calls that bastard Bentley. She said that was the only time she ever cheated or even came close to it. He stalked her for months, and she finally succumbed to his charms, and he scored an amazing goal." I asked how long her mother had been covering her affairs, and she started stuttering. It never occurred to her that it was obvious to me that her mother had been lying about her whereabouts. We exchanged a few unpleasant words, and I hung up. I didn't know if I should have given Jim the information I had gleaned from my eavesdropping. If he decided to reconcile, it would only make things worse. I decided to give him time to decide for himself, but I did so in a decisive way. "Jim, you need to take your time and find out what's really going on. Maybe it was the first time, maybe it wasn't. I suggest you think about the situation and weigh the full implications of your decision, whether you keep Kelly or toss her to the curb." "I feel sorry for you, Mike. You're married to my daughter, but you work with me, so you're caught in the middle of this mess." I feel like I've wasted 25 years of my life. If it weren't for Tracy, I'd say my married life was a meaningless sham. Having a wonderful daughter and a reliable son-in-law is the only saving grace. I was still undecided about my next course of action when I got home that evening. As soon as I entered the kitchen, Tracy and her mother pounced on me from all sides. "Dad told Mom that you were the one who told him Mom was in the pool with Bentley," Tracy declared with great anger. "What kind of asshole would try to ruin his wife's parents' marriage?" "Really? And what did you think I was supposed to do?" I asked more calmly than I actually felt. "You could have told me Jim was in the neighborhood and gotten the hell out of the pool," Kelly interjected. "That would have been the gentlemanly thing to do." "I was afraid you'd lose the pleasure of having one eye massaging your tits in public. I was only thinking about you, even though your naked tits were distracting as hell," I parried. "It's not my fault that you and your mother lied to Jim, that you slept with some crazy weirdo, that your tits were seen by a lot of people, that Jim beat up a self-righteous bastard in cold blood, and that you're trying to shove a bunch of shit on one of the best guys I've ever met." "Did you hear about Grandma lying to Jim?" Tracy asked. "It just keeps getting worse and worse." "You have no idea how bad it is," I stated. "You knew about your mother and grandmother being easy girls, and yet you lied to help them maintain that status. Now you're all pissed at me because your mother was so fucking stupid that she let a scumbag, one badass bastard, play with her tits in public like it was my fault. I'll stick to my decision to be honest and upfront with Jim, while you two try to justify the fucking shit you've been doing to your father and grandfather all these years." I could see the concern on Tracy's face as she considered my words. "I've never cheated on you, and I never would. I'm not like my mom and grandmother. I tried to help them keep their nasty secrets, but I didn't like the whole thing. I kept telling them to stop their affairs and be faithful to their husbands." "You said that?" Kelly asked, before Tracy could give her a murderous look. "Oh yes, that's what she said." Kelly suddenly agreed as a realization of Tracy's plight hit her. "She said she'd never cheat on you, and insisted that Mom and I start following the rules of fidelity. I was wrong to let Bentley seduce me, but it will never happen again. I've learned my lesson. I swear it." "Did George Marsh and Jeff Stevens have big ones too, or were they just extremely convincing?" I blurted out before I could control my mouth. "Tracy, did you tell Mike about George and Jeff? Did you turn your back on me to save your ass?" Kelly demanded an answer. "How could Mike know about them if you didn't tell him?" "Oh no!" Kelly then howled. "Did you tell Jim about George and Jeff? What about Bill Simons? Does Jim know about him too?" "Not yet," I replied with a smile. The next day at work was interesting because of all the life-changing decisions. I told Jim everything I overheard his wife and daughter talking about. He was mad as hell, and then incredibly depressed. "I don't see a choice, Mike. I'm going to contact a lawyer and get a divorce. Don't try to talk me out of it." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied grimly. "I thought we could use the same lawyer and maybe get a better rate." "But Tracy said she never cheated on you," Jim objected. "You have no reason to divorce Tracy. She loves you. I know she does." "I know Kelly loves you, and I wouldn't try to talk you out of a divorce. You're the one who helped me make my decision, Jim. If I hadn't had your wisdom and experience, I might have been tempted to stay with Tracy. You told me that you appeared to have wasted 25 years being married to a cheater. I don't want to find myself in the same situation 23 years from now. I no longer have any trust left in your daughter. I would spend every day worrying about her looking for more. I know damn well that Tracy will insist on letting Kelly and Kelly's mother see our children and influence their lives. Leaving Tracy alone with my daughters would cause me anxiety, but allowing your wife and her mother to even talk to them scares the hell out of me," I admitted. "You can see why I can't continue down this path, can't you?" 4 years later, I decided to take my wife Amber out for our second anniversary. Our daughter Megan was 6 months old, and Amber's parents were more than happy to keep her overnight. Since it was our anniversary, I splurged on a room at the Ritz Hotel, which was nearly 100 miles away. I made dinner reservations and was looking forward to showing my wife how much her love meant to me. I asked for a secluded table and was pleased when we were ushered into a rather dark corner of the room. After we ordered our food and exchanged a few sexy jokes, Amber suddenly straightened up and stared at the entrance. Isn't that your ex-wife? She asked. I remember she was 2 years older than me in high school and looked like a photo model. She's still beautiful. I heard she remarried, but I've never seen her husband. He looks like he's a little older than she is. Actually, he's the same age as Tracy, I replied, turning to see my ex-wife sitting at the other end of the room. Well, he's had a hard life then. He looks old enough to be old enough to be old enough to be her father, Amber remarked. That's not her husband. That guy only has one ball, I replied with a sigh. I made the right decision 4 years ago. Being with you and seeing Tracy now fills me with relief and joy. What does her husband look like? Amber asked when her curiosity was piqued. He looks exactly like a guy walking through the door with a baseball bat in his hand, I replied, mentally thanking my lucky star.